Hey folks, welcome to Roll of Law. This is part one in a series I call Problems with Puzzles. And puzzles can be great in a role-playing game. They can break up combat or exploration. They can provide an opportunity for people to role-play out their characters or show off various abilities of their characters. There's all sorts of cool things about puzzles, but they can also go wrong and they can potentially drag down or throw off your game. So I want to talk about some of these issues with puzzles and how you can improve those or even sometimes spin them into advantages. So the first problem I want to talk about is just, I call it puzzles are stupid. Or the other way to put it is, are they crazy? Because the question is, why does a puzzle exist in the first place? Now, some puzzles are just going to be accidental. If you've ever locked your keys in your car and you're trying to figure out how to get into the car with whatever sort of bits and bobs you can scrounge around from nearby, that's an accidental puzzle. And if you fail that puzzle, you're probably going to have to call AMA, maybe break a window, something like that, but you can try to figure this out. Another example is the classic wolf, sheep, grain puzzle, where you've got a farmer who's trying to get a wolf, a sheep, and grain across a river, and the boat can only hold two things. And how do you do that if two of these things can't be left alone with each other? Of course, one wonders why the farmer's got a wolf in the first place. Is he going to milk it? But these puzzles don't have to make a whole lot of sense as a created thing because they're accidental. They result from somebody screwing up or just chance about the universe. So that kind of solves that whole why did anybody build this problem. These kinds of puzzles, however, tend to be very vulnerable to players who want to come at them sideways or just solve them via some other way of thinking at them. If you throw the wolf, sheep, grain puzzle at your players, expect that they're going to make it across with a sheep, grain, and a wolf pelt. So that's kind of our first category. But when we get into created puzzles, something where it's intentional, now we start wondering, why would you build this in the first place? I've got a bank account and it's protected by a password, but it's not going to be anything like, before my bank balance ye see, ye must answer questions 3. No, I'm going to set the longest password I'm allowed. That's going to be completely random. I'm going to memorize it and write it down nowhere. And the secret password hint will be go into the branch and have this reset because I don't want my bank account stolen. If I'm the evil overlord, I'm not hiring one guard who always lies, one guard who always tells the truth, and one guard who sometimes does whatever. I'm probably hiring 6 guards who just kill anybody who gets too interested in the treasure. So the question really becomes, why would you build a puzzle when you could instead just build a lock? And this can sometimes really throw things off. I like to use a dungeon as kind of my opportunity as a dungeon master to tell a story. This is the story of the dungeon. Why was it built? What's going on here? And a puzzle that doesn't make sense can really throw that off. I also like to make sure that my universe generally makes some kind of sense, that it has some internal consistency, because that allows players to then sort of have expectations about what's going to go on. So if the players expect that things make sense, then they can extrapolate from that. But if they live in a universe where nothing really happens for reasons, then it becomes impossible for them to make deductions and to conclude things. And I like that less in a game than one where they can do those things. So this creates a problem. How do we end up with puzzles in our game? Because we still want to have puzzles, right? That's still something that we consider desirable. We just want to make them make sense. And there are some circumstances where puzzles do make sense as a created thing. I'm going to actually look at some from sort of pop culture and we'll explain why they make sense. But first, the really sort of the 3 factors that I think go into making a puzzle that isn't crazy. And the first thing is to think that a puzzle is intended not so much as a lock, but as a filter. And what I mean by that is it's going to be some sort of mechanical or magical gatekeeper to allow some people in and to lock some people out. So we're not just trying to keep out all of the universe except for a particular person. We're actually trying to let in some people. And the second thing is that those people that we're letting in may be unknown people. This is a filter to sort of look at the whole universe and let some people but we don't know who it is, because if we did, then we just give them keys, or we just tell each of those people the password, and that solves our problem. But if instead we have people who we don't know who they are yet, but they need to be able to get through there, now a puzzle starts to make more sense. And we'll talk about some real world and some fantasy examples here, just to show what I'm talking about here. The next thing is that the puzzles got to rely on some sort of hidden information. And what I mean by that is some sort of information, action, possession, or mode of thinking that you expect will be possessed by the people in your in-group, your allow group, but not by the people you want to keep out. So let's sort of consider some examples of this and how they work. So in World War II, one of the things that was reported is that you'd get situations where you've got soldiers on one side and soldiers on the other, and they might want to pretend to be from the other side. And so you might ask questions in order to filter them out, like an American soldier who's trying to determine if this other person is also an American soldier might ask a question about baseball. This is a situation that relies on hidden information. You don't expect the German soldier to be following American baseball, and it's that filter for a person unknown. This is just a very simple example. Another example is this one.
It reads, "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria, speak friend and enter."
What do you suppose that means?
Oh, it's quite simple. If you are a friend, you speak the password and the doors will open. Anon Nathel Edrochiamer.
So that's Gandalf at the Mines of Moria. And this puzzle, this is a dwarven mine, but it has an elven thing, and that's, there's lore reasons for all of that. But the puzzle is dirt simple. It's just speak friend and enter. But it does require some knowledge. It requires that you know Elvish, first of all, and it requires that you might, sort of be able to parse this out and determine it. In fact, in some ways, this one kind of shows what's going on because it filters Gandalf out a little bit because he's trying to be too tricksy. Whereas somebody who's sort of the ideal candidate here might just take it at its word. So this now this puzzle has other problems, and I'm going to come back to this specific one in other videos. But we can look at another example. This one's from Indiana Jones. So I'm not showing the full sequence here, but it does require that this is kind of another filter for persons unknown. Somebody who is worthy of the Grail should know how to deal with these sorts of hints, whereas somebody who's not worthy won't know or won't think about it, and so forth. So the idea, once again, is relying on some hidden information, and in this case, the hidden information is the mode of thinking that you would expect of somebody who is worthy of the Grail. Whereas the people who are not worthy, not so great for them. So these kinds of puzzles make a lot more sense because basically what they're doing is they're serving as a shibboleth. And that's a reference to the Bible where they were using the pronunciation of that word, which I'm probably mispronouncing, in order to weed out people who were trying to sneak across into their lands who didn't belong. The story itself is kind of violent, so I'm just going to gloss over it. But it's basically a test of something that the in-group that you want can pass and the out-group can't. So this way of thinking of puzzles allows you to play around with things. It's sort of a method of allowing friendlies and denying enemies, but you might be thinking, wait a minute, doesn't this make my life harder? Now I've got to think about why this is there and so forth. Now, if you can't think about why they might do that, then maybe leave the puzzle out. But this can actually really improve your puzzles, both because it makes them make sense within the universe, as I described. I think that's a good thing. But also, one of the issues that you're going to find with puzzles is that you're probably going to have a hard time thinking up your own. There's a whole ton of them out there online, but lots of people already know them. For instance, I mentioned the wolf sheep grain puzzle. If I throw that at my players, there's probably going to be somebody at the table who's just like, all right, here's the sequence. Tower of Hanoi, same thing. People just already know it. Any sort of riddle, there might be somebody who's already run them. I mean, as a DM, I've looked at lots of riddles thinking about whether or not I'd use them in my game. But when we're trying to adapt this to our setting in this fashion, it makes it a lot easier to change these in ways that kind of file off the serial numbers and make it harder for somebody to immediately recognize the puzzle. And that can be really great. That way you can end up sort of breathing new life into puzzles that might be old and tired. And, that way you can reuse them without somebody immediately just spotting it, which is another problem that happens all the time with puzzles. So this, I think, is one of those things that it's a problem with puzzles, but it's also a real opportunity. And it really allows you to not just sort of show off your setting in lore. This is a great way to actually connect that to something tangible. If you're finding that you've written a whole bunch of lore for your universe and your players aren't engaging in it, it's probably because your players don't feel that they sort of need to or that it matters. But when that lore is baked into how puzzles work, now they've got a reason to actually understand and to connect and really, sort of make that bond with your universe. And I think that's fantastic. So I think this one is sort of a solvable problem, and you're probably not using puzzles that often that it's going to be that much of a difficulty to make those sort of tie-ins. So let me know in the comments below what you think. I hope that this is helpful to people, but I always like to hear from you. And if this was helpful to you, let me know. If it wasn't, let me know that as well. There are other issues with puzzles that I'll be talking about in future videos. So stay tuned, and until next time.